Early voting in Chicago is now open in all 50 wards through Election Day on November 5th. Remember, any voter can vote at any early voting site no matter where they live in the city. And if you haven't registered yet or you recently moved, same-day registration is available at all early voting sites. Just bring 2 forms of ID, one of which should have your current address. Go on and check voting off your to-do list and vote early. Go to chicagoelections.gov for more information. This episode is brought to you by Mubi, a global streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema. Starting today, catch the streaming premiere of The Substance. Demi Moore delivers a career-best performance as an A-lister past her prime, transformed by a mysterious drug into a gorgeous 20-something played by Margaret Qualley. It's a deliriously entertaining and spine-tingling masterpiece. You can start streaming The Substance and more for 30 days free at Mubi.com/CityCast. Today on CityCast Chicago, the mayor has released his 2025 budget proposal. We've got a first look at Google's Thompson Center transformation, and a Southside roller skater performs with none other than Usher. Joining me to break it all down from the Illinois Answers Project, Alex Nicken, and City Bureau's Ariel Chung. It's Friday, November 1st. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago is talking about. Morning, my friends. Welcome to the podcast, Ariel. It's nice to see you this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, we're glad that you are in the building. We are also joined by our friend Alex. Alex, great to have you back on the podcast.
Thanks very much. Happy Friday. Happy November.
Every single day, Monday through Friday, we are here celebrating, criticizing, exploring this amazing city of ours. And I'd like to think for the last 900 plus episodes, we've been doing a pretty damn good job. At least that's what all the amazing voters over at the Chicago Readers Best of Chicago have been telling us for the last not 1, not 2, but 3 years, as we have won Best Podcast each of those years. Now it's time to nominate us to achieve the illustrious 4P, an accomplishment so phenomenal, the Bulls refused to even attempt it twice. You can nominate CityCast Chicago for Best Podcast and Hey Chicago for Best Email Newsletter in the City Life category. Again, if you're new here, please check back over the week at some of the episodes we dropped. We had this amazing explainer on Chicago's pension system. We talked about some of our favorite South Asian restaurants across the city. And then, like I said, every Friday, we like to look back on some of the big stories across the week. Yesterday, we dropped our guide to November, where me and the CityCast Chicago producer sat down and we look forward to some of our favorite things coming up this month. Some of the traffic tips we think you should be paying attention to this month. Some of the things we're looking forward to eating. Ariel, I'm going to start with you. What's some things you're looking forward to this month?
I'm very excited for soup season. I've got the chili in the crock pot today.
Come on.
And I have an entire Pinterest board. I might be the last person on earth using Pinterest, but I've got an entire Pinterest board dedicated solely to soups. And I've been stockpiling the recipes.
I need, just off the top of the dome, a couple of your favorite that's on the board.
Potato leek sausage is a great one. Maybe like a little butternut squash with some like pancetta in it. Those are probably a couple big heavy hitters.
I ain't gonna lie, you doing it big during soup season. I was expecting a little chicken noodle, a little tomato. You said, nah, the potato leek with the sausage. We can connect off the podcast if you just happen to be making enough to go around outside the family. Let a brother know. Let a brother know.
Happy to.
Alex, get in here. What's something you looking forward to in November, including soup season?
I'm obviously here for soup season, especially if Ariel is doing it. I have tasted some of her cooking. It's absolutely next level. We're at peak foliage right now, basically, and people usually don't associate November with that, but there are still many, many leaves that have, need to be peeped. Out there in the forest preserves, the Cook County Forest Preserves especially, I went last weekend. Absolutely gorgeous. There's so many lovely trails and areas and landscapes, and it's a great opportunity to just go out, especially before it gets too cold, where we're in this great transition zone where it's still relatively warm and pleasant, but the foliage is beautiful. go out and see some leaves before they all fall off.
Outside of my window, I have these like 4 beautiful trees right next to our building. And I moved in like late March. And so I kind of saw them as they were like coming back. But I've now seen them through summer. I've seen their changing beautiful colors, reds and oranges, the yellows is popping. And I'm excited to like now watch these trees go through their full cycle of winter and everything is gone and sort of watch them come back. I've been telling myself for the last couple of months, I've bust out the art supplies a few times. I've propped a chair in front of the window and I've sketched out the trees.
Do a little Bob Ross action.
And the landscape. I haven't painted it yet, but I have like done a loose, very bad like sketch of these trees. And at some point I'm going to finish it.
So I'm hearing group tree painting session with soup. Alex can bring his homemade sourdough bread. And like that's a party as far as I'm concerned.
I am so happy to have this group together because for the last few weeks, we have been talking about the forthcoming budget proposal from Mayor Brandon Johnson. All of us have heard the $1 billion budget gap over and over and over that the city is staring down. And now on Wednesday, Mayor Brandon Johnson unveiled a $17.3 billion 2025 budget. Essentially, we have no more COVID money. Very few financial maneuvers left to shore up the pockets. We all knew this was going to be a tough budget speech. But Alex, let's start with the Alderman Andre Vasquez-sized elephant in the room. How is the mayor proposing to close this budget gap?
With savings and cutting and revenue, particularly with eliminating about 750 vacant positions in the city budget. And what I think has gotten the most attention rightly is a proposal to raise the city's property tax levy by about $300 million. So it would be going from $1.8 billion that the city collects in property taxes up to about $2.1 billion.
Let's kind of break down what that number means for property owners across the city, because as somebody who does not own property, I am not necessarily like upfront being sort of burdened with this rise. However, I know that this is something that immediately city council members balked at. People who have already been seen with increases in their property tax bill balked at. But Ariel, can you kind of help us put this number into context? What would this mean for property owners in the city of Chicago?
Yeah, absolutely. The city did put out some estimates Wednesday afternoon. And for someone who owns a $100,000 house and their property tax bill in 2023 was about $1,400, they're looking at about a $72 increase for the year. If you own a $250,000 house and your property taxes were about $4,600, you're looking at around $220 increase. So it's a 4.8% impact. So that goes up to, a $500,000 house. You're looking at about $480 increase over the course of the year.
Mm-hmm. Alex, so many headlines have talked about Mayor Brandon Johnson breaking a major campaign promise. I'm going to be real with you. During the campaign season, when this was one of Campaign Johnson's major tenant, I sat there with so many of you all, so many of my colleagues going, oh, this is a big thing to promise people in the city of Chicago where finding revenue is not easy. And it is likely one that you may not be able to hold strong to, not just in these next couple of budgets. Are property taxes the only proposed tax increase in this budget?
No, it's the most significant increase for sure. Mm-hmm. There are a couple of more marginal increases sort of around the edges. There's one to make sure that the city is collecting the entire 7-cent bag tax instead of, remitting some of that back to retailers. There is a little bit of a hike on some alcohol excise taxes and sales taxes, but the property tax really is the major one. And you're right to be skeptical, I think, that the mayor could go an entire term without raising property taxes, because of all of the revenue ideas and, things that Johnson proposed, the property tax really is legally, if not politically, the easiest lever for the city to pull whenever it needs money. That's why it's been so much more readily done than any of these other ideas in the past. Let's also just remember that, a big premise of Mayor Johnson's, economic agenda or fiscal policy campaign was the city has a structural deficit of $1 billion every year. The city is spending more than it's taking in. And for that reason, he proposed $800 billion in new annual revenue. He has since actually put into place $0 of that actual revenue. And so this was, I think, pretty inevitable that he would be in this position of, really having nowhere else to turn. This is also a big reason why, you recall that near the beginning of the previous mayor, Lori Lightfoot, came out with a proposal to basically tie the property tax levy every year to inflation. That it would naturally go up every year with the consumer price index. Everyone hated that idea, including Johnson. The only people who liked it were like financial analysts and like credit rating agencies who were sort of looking around at each other like, that actually makes perfect sense. Like the city's expenses are going up with inflation, and so why shouldn't its revenues also go up with inflation? And the irony is that after making such a big deal out of not raising property taxes last year, the Johnson administration came out with a graphic this year showing that, it may seem steep, this hike this year, but it's actually consistent with what the property tax increase would have been if it were tied to CPI, to inflation the whole time. I was going back and looking at some of the ways that Lightfoot was arguing for this, for that proposal to tie it to inflation. She was saying, look, the way that it's always been done is that politicians will sort of hide behind zero increases until there's a crisis when they have no choice but to dump one giant increase all at once. And that was a way to get around that. I think it's also, in the context of some of these other options that the city has, like sales taxes, or pointing to like the state income tax or anything like that. A lot of people are not going to want to hear this, but the property tax is by far the most progressive and most stable form of revenue that the city collects. It's effectively a wealth tax. If you look at that guide that the administration put out of how much you pay based on how much, your property is worth, the difference of if you own a $150,000 home is exponentially different than if you own $1 million home. And so I think that this is something that people, understandably feel really crunched by. I mean, Illinois and Chicago in particular has super high property taxes compared to almost anywhere else in the country. But basically, a lot of what we're seeing is the effect of the city having to pay more and more into pensions as a result of just ignoring those obligations for so long. You had a great episode the other day with Amanda Cass talking in depth about pensions and why suddenly that's such a huge demand on the city right now. And that's ultimately where most of our property taxes are going, are to pay for pensions. And that obligation is just growing and growing.
Yeah. I want to give Mayor Johnson some credit as someone who has been critical throughout this process, understanding that holding strong to campaign promises are extremely difficult and thus a necessary part of being elected. I will say I thought his budget address from a public speaking perspective was one of his best speeches in office. I thought he did a great job to sandwich the property tax bad news that we all knew was already coming. I thought he did the necessary job of reminding people, again, the picture I think many of us already understood, which is how we got to where we are. But Ariel, given that we had this major gap to close, little to no COVID relief money to do it. How did this impact Johnson's broader social investments when we think of affordable housing, mental health services, the city's shelter systems, anti-violence program, youth employment? Because these were also campaign promises. And so how did they fare in this budget?
Yeah, a lot of those promises are not appearing in the new budget. There's no plan to open additional mental health clinics in 2025. We just saw one of them reopen, I believe, in Roseland. But beyond that, it looks like there's no plans for that for next year. 3 clinics have opened during Johnson's first year and a half in office, and I believe there were 6 that were shuttered during Rahm Emanuel's tenure. And that was something that progressive groups have been talking about quite a bit is, where is that affordable housing? Where are those reducing violence, creating jobs for Chicago youth. I did see an interesting story from Heather Sharon that came out earlier this week about the fact that there's a little less than $300 million left in federal COVID relief money that the city has to spend by the end of the year, or budget by the end of the year. And a lot of that money has been used, the total $540 million that was originally put aside has been used for affordable housing, mental health, violence prevention, youth jobs. And so while a lot of officials are hesitant to put that towards something that would then put them in a shortfall as soon as that one-time fund is used up, they're saying things that, like, affordable housing, for example, could have that one-time infusion of cash that would then carry it forward in a positive way. So there is still, it seems like, some money to be left, but there are definitely some promises that in this proposed budget are not going to be fulfilled in 2025.
I mean, it's tough, right? You're seeing a real contradiction between not just, in the details, but philosophically what this mayoral administration was going to represent, which was a return to expansion and reinvestment in a lot of government services. Things like treatment, not trauma. Like, we're going to stop trying to save money by outsourcing our mental health care and actually reinvest in city-provided services. And what you're seeing is that kind of philosophy just coming to head with the reality of the city has done nothing in the past 2 years to try to bring in more revenue to contend with its existing growing costs. And so he's in this painful situation where he has to find any examples that he can of, yeah, we opened a couple of these clinics here. He talked about the one shelter system of combining the city's migrant shelters and homeless shelters, and talked a little bit about sort of rapid rehousing. But there's really not a whole lot for him to go off there because, again, he had a whole reimagining of what city government is for, but really has not had either the political will or muscle to come out and say something like, we're going to do something bold and dramatic, like, I don't know, like a city income tax on high earners, or, yeah, we're going to raise the property tax by this much, or, any real significant revenue proposal. Every time he's been asked about new revenue for the last year and a half, he's sort of punted it over to this subcommittee on revenue that he has deputized to come up with ideas. They haven't really done anything, to be honest. They came up with sort of one marginal idea of, like, maybe we put ads on the Riverwalk and that'll bring in some money for the city. But as long as this is the reality of the city just has not opened any new revenue streams, it's going to be really, really hard for the mayor to actually, put his money where his mouth is and follow through on a sort of bold expansion and reimagining of what public services are and how they look.
Ariel, this budget process is ongoing. What's next, and how is City Bureau helping the rest of us follow along?
Yeah, so budget season is probably the Christmas of City Bureau, particularly among our documenters team. Everyday folks who get trained and paid to cover public meetings, government meetings, and then provide kind of a written record. They live tweet a lot of those hearings, so they go all in on budget season. So coming up in the next week, they'll be covering the different hearings about all the different parts of the budget. And that's kind of a process that takes place over the next 2+ weeks or so. And then that all culminates in the final budget hearings in that first week of December, when then City Council actually votes. And we actually have a budget bingo where we put out a series of bingo boards and people can play along. And last year we had some budget bingo t-shirts as prizes. And one of the winners was, in fact, Alderman Maria Haddon, who was a passionate budget bingoer. So that's one thing that we really look forward to and have a lot of fun with.
We will drop multiple links in our show notes to help you make sense of this $17 billion budget, but also links to our friends over at City Bureau so you can follow along over the next couple of weeks. Remember, the City Council must approve and pass a balanced budget by December 31st. So we're going to be watching this very closely as we round out the rest of the year. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. As we transition from the spooky season into the thankful season, my word of the day is gratitude. I want to show gratitude to my family for supporting my passions. I'm grateful for all the folks who listen to me almost every day. And I'm especially grateful to my friends who always check in and let me know it's okay to not always be okay. Seriously, if it wasn't for my friends, I probably would have never taken the time to start therapy when I was younger. If you're thinking of starting therapy, let me be that friend for you and say, maybe give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you got to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/citycast today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/citycast. While most of our attention when it came to City Council this week was focused on the budget, they did take up some other things, including looking over the mayor's appointments to the Regional Transit Authority Board. Alex, how did that go?
Poorly. So, I mean, this flew under the radar on Wednesday for obvious reasons, but it is very, very rare that the City Council votes down a proposal from the mayor, especially for something as typically mundane as an appointment to a board. And so this was a pastor named Jerickson Medina who was nominated by the mayor to be a member of the board for the Regional Transportation Authority, which is sort of a big, sort of loose umbrella organization that oversees public transit in the Chicago region. And it was honestly kind of an echo. We saw a similar situation play out a couple months ago when the mayor nominated Reverend Ira Ackrey to the Regional Transportation Authority. And in the committee hearing where they were asking him about transit stuff, it was kind of uncomfortable. It was clear that part of the reason why he was appointed is he's sort of like a layman, a pastor, a person of the community, but the heightened pressure on cities' transit agencies is really, I think, permeating through the city council in terms of an expectation of like, we deserve and want actual like experts and professionals in this subject matter who are in this vital position of overseeing major necessary public service that's really in crisis right now. This is, especially as more attention is being put on the RTA and what it does or doesn't do in terms of potential state legislation about merging the transit agencies. Just looking at the fact that so many of these board appointments have just been used to essentially reward folks' political allies instead of actually empower them to make really impactful decisions on transit. And so this was really, I think, a shot across the bow, this rejection on Wednesday of this appointee.
Yeah. The mayor pushed back on some reports saying that the pastor was, his parish is 75% of them are public transit riders and that he has a particular insight. But like you said, at the meeting, he talked about or had mentioned previously that he hadn't been riding public transit for the last few years.
Oh, yeah. He said, well, my family has 2 cars, so we don't need to take public transit. And I think that was just one of these cringy moments.
Which is not as bad as earlier this year when Ackrey basically was like, public transit. I get money.
Said,
I ain't no
yeah, he said, I'm blessed and I'm grateful that I don't need to take public transit.
Right.
Wrong answer.
And so, again, like you said, I think not only in city council, but across the city, people's pushback is like, okay, then let's appoint one of those people in the parish who do ride public transit often,
Sure. Yeah, someone who actually knows, what the Green Line, was looking like this morning. It's also a big reason or a big argument for merging these transit agencies is that there are a couple dozen of these board seats across the 4 different transit agencies. And people are really looking at them and with renewed skepticism of like, are they all really necessary? What are they really doing? And are they really, spending their time trying to advocate for better transit?
Ariel, there is constant coverage of Google's forthcoming offices downtown at the Thompson Center. And our friend Lee Bay, columnist over at the Sun-Times, got some first looks at what they're planning. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I am a Thompson Center girly through and through. That food court gets you through some rough times downtown when you're looking for lunch. Shout out Arby's. But it looks. I like a lot of what they kept intact. You get the beautiful glass walls pouring in the sunlight with the view of the city around you. It looks like there's going to be a lot of restaurants, retail. It's a lot of verdant greenery surrounding it. And again, the atrium would be open to the public and not just tenants during business hours. So, for those of us who don't work in Thompson Center, we'd still be able to go and enjoy a business lunch. The biggest, honestly, like the one change that like I kind of had a little pause is that salmon blue and white color scheme on the exterior that's gone in these proposed renderings. You've got some what Lee calls sober grays, silvers, and tans.
That's what's given. The lighting makes it feel a little more bronze, but I can see past the saturation increase and can tell it'll be a little more muted. I've said before, my mom worked in this building when I was a kid. And so I remember driving up to it, dropping her off there, or going there to pick her up at the end of the day a couple of times. And I'm glad that it's still around. I recently walked by it and saw it stripped. Have you all seen it stripped of all of its glass?
I actually have not.
It's spooky, but also kind of exciting.
It is. It reminds you of just how transparent the building has always been. It feels like you can just look through it. And but now you really can see the bones of the elevator. It's a little creepy, especially at night.
I will say I agree with you. I'm really glad that overall the integrity of what the Thompson Center was for that part of the city it is largely going to remain intact. We'll still get to enjoy it despite it being a Google building. So I mean, I would say like it could have gone so much worse.
Could have been a water park.
It's going to be celebrating 40 years next year. The Helmayan Design Building originally opened in May of 1985 as the State of Illinois Center. And so, I mean, it's a good way to celebrate 40, I think, by not being completely torn down or replaced.
May we all be so lucky.
Every single episode of CityCast Chicago ends the same way, and that's with me begging you to come back for the next episode, to stop by chicago.citycast.fm, to subscribe to our daily newsletter, Hey Chicago. But before I do all of that begging, I do a little bit of singing. There's a little bit of it. Some good news. This could be something personal. This could be a story you read, just something happening in your life. Ariel, I'm going to start with you. What is your good news?
Yeah, I read this really beautiful feature from the Tribune, Zareen Syed, about a family, a Chicago area Palestinian family who travels back to their home country for olive harvest season, even amid the war in Gaza. And this particular family includes 80-year-old Nadia Hussein, who goes back and sits on her balcony and is there like brushing the olives off of the trees and then pulling the leaves off of the olives. And she gets her year's supply of olive oil from this, journey home. And I just thought it was a really lovely story. I'm a very, very, very amateur gardener, and the joy I get out of, the couple handfuls of tomatoes that I harvest, I'm sure is absolutely nothing compared to this. And there's a lot of beautiful writing in there about, being a keeper of your land and preserving it for generations to come. And I just thought it was a really moving, touching story that, goes from Chicago all the way to Palestine.
Yeah, this was equal parts beautiful, equal parts devastating. Shout out to Zareen Syed over at the Trib. I mean, through this family, they also talked about members of their community back here in Chicago who obviously would not be able to return to either parts of Gaza where devastation has been wrought on Palestinians, parts of the West Bank where for generations there has been displacement, ongoing displacement, and just to see this family, to see this elder sort of sitting in her home saying, I just miss being in my home, on my land, you know, picking at my tree. And when she's back in Chicago, to know that's what she misses so much. And they talked about how the family is there. They left in mid-October, and how she's going to be the hardest one to bring back. And how she may decide, no, I'm good on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alex, I want to kick it over to you. What is your good news CityCast Chicago today?
So I want to talk about a cool story that I read and also wrote about the city tree trims. This is a story that we came out with at Illinois Answers last week. Essentially what we found is that 2 years ago, the Department of Transport, Streets and Sanitation specifically made a big, dramatic, controversial switch in the way that it manages, the way that it trims trees. It had been just a completely complaint-based system. The trimmers just wait for someone to complain and request a trim, and then they would have to wait a year or two sometimes to get them out there. It was hectic. There was a huge backlog, and they decided about 2 years ago to move to a grid system where they go block by block, tree by tree, to try to proactively trim over the course of the whole city. A lot of aldermen really hated that idea. They did not want that to be sort of centralized. They wanted it to be, stay within ward offices so that alder people could sort of direct it. But we took a look at the data, and lo and behold, it has been dramatically successful. It has led to a 118% increase in efficiency and just number of trees trimmed in a yearly period. And this was just, I think, a very powerful example of what is possible when a city department moves from a reactive, sort of politically centralized, complaint-based system that still dominates a lot of the way that the city services are done, where whenever the city is asked about, can we do like a proactive, more modernized system? And the city said, no, that's impossible. And so here's an example of they actually did it and it worked. And we think it's important for people to know about that.
Yeah, give credit when credit is due. We will definitely drop links to both of these stories in our show notes as well. And our good news, I want to wrap us up with a 3-parter. One, I got to show love to our friends over at City Bureau who are celebrating 9 years this week. I saw this blurb that you all put out that I thought was so cool. Since 2015, City Bureau has hosted 156 public newsrooms to connect people with critical civic information and foster dialogue, equipped 3,600 plus documenters to cover local public meetings in 14 states and 24 counties, and trained and mentored 157 civic reporting fellows to produce groundbreaking community-based journalism. So Ariel, shout out to you, your entire team. Shout out to the founders of City Bureau and everyone working to continue and grow the mission. You want to send any quick shout outs?
We've got our current fellowship cohort working on our next public newsroom, which will be November 21st. And we'll be talking about how to hold public officials accountable now that they've been elected, reelected, etc. So a little post-election look forward.
And then I want to give my last piece of good news to one of my homies who I grew up with, Sydney Blaylock. We grew up roller skating together. She is currently one of the roller skaters on tour with Usher. She performed with him at his Super Bowl halftime show. And she had her homecoming this week as his tour dropped at the United Center. And she not only performed, but her boyfriend, who was also a skater in the tour, proposed to her live at the concert. And so that was covered throughout the news this week. And it's just been so cool to watch somebody who I grew up with roller skating, like trying to learn how to do some of the most difficult backbreaking moves together, just continue to like hone her passion And so for her to actually be out there living this dream with him on those 8 wheels has just been one of the coolest experiences as a friend. And so I'm glad that the tour went successful for her this past week in Chicago. That is all from me here at CityCast Chicago today. I want to give a huge shout out to our guest from City Bureau, Ariel Chung. Ariel, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure.
And from the Illinois Answers Project and the Better Government Association, Alex, Nick, and Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy budget season and soup season.
Before we let you go, a piece of news that came down after we wrapped recording. Chicago's new school board president, Reverend Mitchell Akinna Johnson, has resigned after just 7 days on the job because of old social media posts. To learn more, tap into our website, chicago.citycast.fm. Before we get out of here, I got to give a huge thank you to everybody who makes CityCast Chicago possible. Our executive producer is Simone Alicea. Our producer is Michelle Navarro. Our Hey Chicago newsletter editor is Sydney Madden. Our roving producer is Lizzie Goldsmith. The music we all love is from Sam Thousand, All the Kimonos, and Mark Greenberg from the Mayfair Workshop. Shout out to all the CityCast Chicago members. I want to thank everybody who has shared us with your friends and your family. All of the people who go to chicago.citycast.fm to tap in with our articles, our best food and drink list, our neighborhood and walking guides. And the one favor I need every single person listening at this point in the episode, whether I'm on 1 time, 2 times speed, 1.5. If you listen to me on 0.5 speed, that's kind of wild. I ain't gonna lie. That's a little. Why are you listening this slow? I guess that would slow it down even more for you. But my point being, I need everybody to get together on this one thing. Be back here bright and early on Monday. I'm going to be here. I'm going to talk to you then. Peace.
I'm just so glad that you mentioned the food court at the top and the Arby's, because that's really what it's all about for me. That's the most important.
Like I said, I stand Arby's. I'm never gonna argue against that. But it would be cool to see if some more local food options also get added to the roster when the time comes.
Respectfully, absolutely not. I think that is the one place where we have the really like cheap chains, and it's good to have a mix. And like, I don't want to diss any like great local restaurants, but if this becomes another food hall where it's like our concept is like $19 tacos and smoothies, I'm gonna be upset. I'm sorry. I want fair. Like good, cheap, democratized.
It's all around. It's all outside around the Thompson Center, though.
It's not the same, Jacoby.
It's not the same.